everybody, this is Perch, and responding to a viewer question here as I slowly go through the endless pile of email that stacks up with this stuff. So this question, should comics have trigger warnings? Perch, I tend to lean left. I enjoy comics. I enjoy lots of different comics, but one thing that I think would go a long ways to helping identify comics that I would enjoy, that I would read, is if comics possessed trigger warnings. What do you think? So, what I think is that I'm being trolled with this question. To be honest, I trigger warnings. That's like so 2017. I mean, for reals. I don't know. I'm seeing more and more stuff about more and more surveys and reports come out that trigger warnings are actually been shown to be detrimental to people who, in theory, need trigger warnings. And the logic basically goes like this. Um, well, what is, first of all, you may be going, what is a trigger warning? Is it something that needs to be done for the Punisher comics? Well, probably, but no, that's not what trigger warnings are. And it's basically a way to say, almost like a warning. Before you get into this comic is going to contain elements that could include things that would bother people. Trigger an emotional response. Like if you were mugged at one point and the comic features a mugging, that reading this would be traumatic for you because it would force you to relive that mugging. It's a kind of a psychological approach thing that got, like I said, it gained some widespread, I don't want to say popularity, but just people started talking about it more and more around 2017. And then comics being comics, they kind of wandered into it in late 2018, 2019, because, they're always somewhat behind. And so they started, introducing some of this stuff. I saw people on Twitter saying things like, my new comic comes out on Wednesday, but trigger warning, it deals with emotional abuse and etc. And so this was a thing. This was something that people attempted to try. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of studies coming out now that suggest that the whole concept of trigger warnings has had the opposite effect. And the logic basically goes that people, humans being humans, they tend to, when they see a warning for something, they can't look away. That it's like people who know that doom scrolling on Twitter is a bad idea. That spending their time there is unlikely to make them happy. But they see a notification come in and they're like, oh, I gotta click now. I gotta see what this notification is for this thing, and that the trigger warning basically just caused people who would otherwise avoid material that might bother them to pick it up because they're too curious about what exactly went on, and then or they wouldn't have normally associated their whatever past trauma with what's going on in the comic, but thanks to the trigger warning, it's forcing them to kind of remember it's reminding them. Basically, the trigger warning is reminding them more than the actual event. I think all this is stupid. So I mean, it's I think that look, this is going to slip between sarcastic Perch and dad Perch. A lot of different Perch types. I'm like that Crazy Jane character from Doom Patrol. There's all these different personalities with superpowers, except these superpowers aren't really superpowers. They're just kind of lame things. I think that if you as a person are trying to avoid being reminded of past trauma, hiding yourself away from it is unlikely to accomplish that goal. Again, everybody is different. Everybody, how they process memories and pain, all that kind of stuff. Everybody has different things going on. And so there's not one approach. And I think this is maybe the biggest, most helpful piece of advice I can give anyone in life is that, you are different. Everybody is different, and you're going to handle things, deal with things emotionally, work through things. It's all going to be different for whoever you happen to be. And so whenever somebody comes around with hey, let's do this one thing that's going to help everybody, it won't. And it's forcing conformity to something like this is a waste of time. It's not going to work. It's not going to help, and it's going to some people will be good, some people won't. But it defers actually teaching people or giving people real tools to actually work through whatever they're working through. And I mean, so a lot of psychological mumbo jumbo. Is this needed for comics? No, I would say no. I feel bad for people who have undergone horrors and have these situations they're working toward. I mean, I I feel for you. There's a lot of terrible things that go on in the world all the time. But the reality is you're going to face these, you're going to be confronted with these things in plenty of mediums long before you get to comics. I mean, comics, put it another way, comics is the least of your troubles if being triggered by certain things is going to be a problem for you. This got to be popular in educational institutions. The very cynical view of all this was that it was all done around just basic liability. It was a way for schools to kind of do cosmetic level dressing things that would help prevent them legally from being sued or having people get complaints come in. It was defensive armor more than anything else. It's why a lot of the trigger warnings are written by lawyers rather than psychologists and other things in the beginning. So I think that's the origin point here. But let me now turn this topic into something maybe a little bit, what I think a little bit more productive. And I don't mean to be insulting. I do appreciate everybody who sends me a question. I just don't think comics needs to go down this path. I think there's now plenty of evidence to suggest it won't actually help anything. But one thing that would help is forgetting completely about the psychology and traumas and all that kind of stuff. One thing that would actually help quite a bit is if comics did a better job of conveying what this comic was all about, meaning not things that might trigger people, but things that might interest people. Like this comic is, this is a sci-fi comic, this is a horror comic, this is a Western comic. Start there, and then get into this is a team book, this is a etc. I mean, if you think about kind of, and this is going to be required at some point anyway, if these companies are going to fully embrace digital, you're going to need tagging for these books in order to filter and be able to search. And some comics are kind of doing this. They're just doing this in a very kind of amateur way. What would be very helpful for books is if kind of almost a refinement of what companies have done in the past or attempted to do on that first page, meaning, hey, this is catching you up to speed of what's going on in the story. This is the kind of comic it is. I mean, some level of not disclaimer, but this is something that can help match you to a comic. I do think the big companies, particularly any comic company that's producing 50, 60, 70 books a month, and actually the company that benefit this the most is Image. Image produces a lot of things. They do not have the benefit of long running franchises. I mean, obviously they do have Spawn, they have Savage Dragon, but compared to Marvel and DC, they don't have 50, 60 plus characters that have all have had solo books at one point or another over the last 10 years. There's most of the books coming out from Image by volume are relatively new. They're either limited series, they're creator-owned projects, they're a variety of different things they're trying to get over. Image has a vast amount of LGBTQ content, of horror content, of sci-fi, of all these different things are going on at Image. And one thing that is tough is that Image does a poor job of leveraging kind of the strength of what they have. If somebody gets hooked on The Walking Dead, all right, how do you hook them on 2 or 3 other books? Well, Image being kind of a decentralized model a little bit where creators are bringing their own projects to the table, maybe some of the management at Image doesn't necessarily feel like they have good abilities to cross-promote and say, if you like this comic, you would like this comic. If you like horror, here's something over here. I think some kind of, again, it's not a trigger warning at all, but some level of thing at the beginning, you say, hey, this is a horror book. Here's the 4 other horror books that we're producing this month. You might want to go check that out. Some level of qualification to say, this is what this comic is going to contain. Here's other comics we're putting out that contain similar things. You might want to go check it out. Here's where you can jump on. Maybe I've often thought this was a good idea where if the comic is like, say, on issue number 3 of a 6-issue arc, then somewhere in the beginning, point out to people where the starting point was. Like comics are always saying this is a good jumping on point. Sometimes it's at the start of an arc. Sometimes it just happens to be some random part of the run. Being able to say, hey, if you picked up this, issue 27 here, if you can, go to your shop and kind of work your way backward to issue 24, that was a good jumping on point for you. So if you're a little bit confused, here right on our first page these are the 3 issues to go back to. You should go all the way back to number 1, but at least go back to, issue number 24, for example, and that's going to help give you a more complete story. I think that kind of stuff would be highly valuable. I think it would help the publisher, it would help the comics, it would help the readers, it would help the shops. It would be very, very useful, and I think ultimately more valuable than, say, a trigger warning would be, in my opinion. But I do thank you for the question. It's you know, I don't know. Again, it feels like the era of the trigger warning kind of passed us by a little bit. That was is very popular. You hear much less about it. It's still out there, but increasingly it feels like kind of somebody who's still trying to push cassette tapes or Betamax as opposed to something current and relevant. But anyway, I appreciate it. What do you think? Maybe I'm all wrong here. Do comics need trigger warnings? Let me know in the comments and questions below. Comments below, question. Anyway, let me know below. That's what would be great. And thanks for listening.